Good morning, church. If you've been with us this summer, you know that we've been in a sermon series called Eden to Canaan. We've been exploring that first great story from the scriptures, and we are in the final few weeks of Egypt to Canaan. And today's topic is wilderness. And if you're friends with me on Facebook, you probably saw my little message, what comes to mind for you when you think of wilderness? And some of you might have seen that and thought, that has to do with the sermon. It might go in the sermon. And you would be right. And one of the things that I noticed as I was looking at the responses is how much wisdom that my friends have. I mean, there are about 10 different sermons in the comments to that question. So thank you for responding. But let's be honest. We all know that what I was really looking for was validation. That in fact, the first thing that comes to my mind is also the first thing that comes to your mind, and that we're all on the same page. And you did not disappoint me on that level either. So thank you for the many reactions that are the same as me when I think of wilderness. For many of us, what comes to mind when we think of wilderness is recreation. It's getting out, getting away, getting outside, going on adventures, going camping, no technology, no Starbucks, the uncomfortable ground, and so on. In fact, some of you even gave me pictures as your response of what. I like the one up in the right. That's brilliant, getting outside. This way of thinking of wilderness as this place we go to get away, to separate ourselves from the ordinary, to separate ourselves from regular patterns. We see it multiple times in sayings and quotes from John Muir, the mountaineer and environmental enthusiast. Thousands of tired, nerve-shaken, over-civilized people are beginning to find out that going to the mountains is going home, that wildness is a necessity. And he wrote that 120 years ago. I don't know if we have discovered this yet. But today I want to talk about a different sort of wilderness. I want to talk about a different kind of wilderness than that is this first impulse. I want to talk about a wilderness that we do not choose, that is not our choice, that we are not in control of. I want to talk about a wilderness that comes our way whether we like it or not. It's an experience that we can't prepare for, really, that we can't schedule. And it's one that is a great sign, or a sign of having gone through great suffering. In fact, I think the impulse of this kind of wilderness actually betrays for some of us our privilege. To be able to choose to go to the wilderness, to choose discomfort, to choose to go away. It implies that my normal life has a regular level of safety and stability and comfort that not everybody in the world shares. The children of Israel went through the sort of wilderness that we're going to look at this morning. You know the story, just super, super broadly. The end of the book of Genesis begins, or it ends with shalom, right? There's relative peace and harmony, right? Joseph has made reconciliation with his brothers. Everyone has enough food. But then Egypt begins right away, this period of injustice, of oppression, this period that is not okay. There's no way we can wrap our minds around justifying it or making it all right. It's not okay. This moment of deep suffering and trial and pain. And then they cry out, the story goes, and God sends a deliverer, right? Moses comes on the scene, and empowered by God, Moses takes this stand, and there's this harrowing Red Sea experience. They had been in Egypt for centuries, but in a matter of just a months or years, they have this harrowing Egypt or Red Sea 10-plague experience, and all of a sudden they find themselves free, right? They're delivered. It's a momentary experience. But they don't find themselves in the promised land right away, right? The story goes that they spend 40 years in the wilderness. They're safe. Pastor Jen talked about that last week. They're safe. They're taken care of. God is with them. Their needs are met. They're not comfortable, but they're taken care of. They're in the wilderness before they get to the promised land. And of course, as is the case with many stories in the scriptures, this story not only happened, it happens. The story is not only true in the historical sense, it's true in the human sense. We live this pattern over and over and over again. The process that the Israelites went through from Exodus, Egypt, to eventually the promised land, we are familiar with it. After in our lives, after we go through injustice and oppression and pain or injury or trauma, after we get delivered from Egypt, after we're rescued, after we're in safety, and many of you here have been agents of that change, right? Many of you have been agents against injustice, and you've helped people get out. But after the rescue, after we're safe, very, very often there's this strange period where everything's not okay, but we're not in immediate suffering anymore. We're not in immediate injury in that moment. There's this period of wilderness where we're uncomfortable, and there's struggle, and there's learning, and there's processing, and there's integrating, and there's coming to understand what just happened to me. Wilderness follows deliverance from Egypt. It's as right as rain. It happens all the time. We see it in many different patterns. Recovery follows addiction, right? Remission follows disease and diagnosis and treatment. Therapy and healing and strengthening follows abuse, right? After we make a choice to make a change in our lives, there comes a struggle. It's not just immediate. It's not just instantaneous. We make the choice, and then we go through a period of wilderness. When we go through loss, right? The loss is over. We may be in a place of safety, but there's this long process of grief. Many of us know what this feels like. We see this pattern over and over. We see it in the story of salvation, where we move from a place of sin. We are justified. We are made right with God, loved and accepted and forgiven exactly as we are. And then there's this process. They call it the work of a lifetime in some theological circles, where we are sanctified, where we become more and more like Jesus. It's the wilderness, this pattern of moving from injustice to safety, to wilderness. It happens over and over and over again. And of course, wilderness, it's not something we would ever want. It's not something we choose. It's uninvited. It's uncomfortable. But we all know it. And if there's any of us in this room who has not had occasion yet to experience wilderness, just wait. It comes to all of us. So here's the thing about this uncomfortable wilderness that comes our way, whether we like it or not. Even though it's unwanted, even though it's uncomfortable, even though it's pleasant, even though there are rocks under us when we sleep and so on, even though it's not pleasant, it's packed with opportunity. It's filled with possibilities. It's filled with all kinds of opportunities for growth. In fact, it's in these wildernesses that I think some of life's most important tasks come to us. If we want to be people of maturity, if we want to be people who step into our greatest meaning in life, if we want to become the kind of people that God made us to be, if we want to live in happiness and experience joy, some of the tasks in wilderness are absolutely essential to getting there. The road from Egypt to the promised land goes through wilderness. If we want that experience of the promised land, very often wilderness is the season we have to go through. I mean, I think that this is part of why it took Israel 40 years to get through the wilderness. You know, it wasn't because God got them lost. It wasn't because he was confused about where he was leading them. It wasn't because they took a whole bunch of wrong turns. They had work to do. They had essential tasks that they needed to accomplish before they would step into what was next for them. And the fact of the matter is that it's difficult to accomplish these tasks without having gone through some Egypt. I mean, we can try to work on them, we can try to insert ourselves into these tasks, but really they happen the best and the most fully when we're in these moments of wilderness. You know, Jesus has this saying, whoever has ears, let them hear. And I think it's moments of wilderness that help us to grow those ears. That's where that muscle comes in. You know, it's funny, sometimes I wonder if we who are privileged, if part of the reason we like to go to the wilderness is because we're trying to create occasion to do some of that work. And I don't think that it's all, I don't think it's 100% futile. I mean, I know we're talking about wilderness that comes to us that we don't want, but I think that to some degree or another, we can put ourselves, we can kind of manufacture that discomfort and maybe try to do some of these tasks. You know, the Walla seniors are just on the cusp of going on their senior survival. It's just in the next couple of weeks, and they're going to try to do a little bit of that. The truth is that wilderness is the gift that nobody wants, but that everyone needs. Right? It's sort of like getting socks for Christmas, you know, right? It's not active. You know, wilderness is not active suffering. Wilderness is not injustice. It's not God doing things to us, but it's not like as good as a new bike, right? You know, wilderness is the gift that nobody wants, but everyone needs. So with the few minutes that we have left this morning, I want to look at 3 of the essential tasks of wilderness. Just look and ask some questions about what it has in store for us. The first is about identity. You know, almost as soon as the children of Israel make their way into the wilderness, one of the first things God tells them to do, it's in that Exodus chapter 20, in those 10 commandments. The fourth one, you know, remember the Sabbath to keep it holy. I mean, the Israelites for generations, for centuries, had been under slavery, right? They didn't take a day off. You just worked and worked and worked and worked and worked. And so this is like, maybe it might seem like an insignificant shift, or maybe seem like there wasn't a shift at all, but God, I think this is an identity move where God says, no, you're going to take a whole day and produce absolutely nothing. You're going to do a whole day and bring absolutely no value to this world. You're going to take a day and just be. Because your value as human beings is not dependent on how much money you make, or how many bricks you make, or what you do, or what you create, or how famous we are, or how big your business is. It has nothing to do with your identity is based on me. You're my child. You're my son. You're my daughter, and you are loved exactly as you are. Sabbath is about identity. It's a moment where we remember who we really are, where we really came from, and that we do not need to work to make God okay with us. We rest in the love and the absolute beauty of God, right? So he says, rest, take a break. Remind yourselves that you do not have to earn my favor. You know, one of the things that can happen when we go through trauma, when we go through abuse, when we go through these seasons of Egypt, is that we can kind of take on shame, right? We can take on these perspectives and come to believe that I deserve that. I'm not valuable enough to deserve better. Sometimes we can go through these experiences, when we go through these experiences where we feel devalued or overlooked, or oppressed or mistreated or demonized or objectified or discriminated against. We can take that on ourselves and start believing that stuff about us. And so one of the tasks, I think, of wilderness is to confront that stuff and to see who we really are. Who does God say I am? I was created in His image, and I am loved exactly as I am. So part of the work of wilderness, part of the work for some of us in this room might be learning to trust this joyful, vibrant announcement that God makes on our behalf. You are mine, and you don't have to prove it or perform it or do anything to earn it. You are mine, and you are loved, and you are beautiful and holy and capable. You are enough. Some of you are familiar with Brené Brown and her work on shame. I want to suggest another book about shame that's not by her, by a guy named John Bradshaw. I've come to really, really appreciate his work, and he wrote this book, Healing the Shame That Binds You, about how to work through shame. So that might be a book recommendation for some of us who feel as though we're working on this task of wilderness. So that's one, identity. A second of the essential tasks for that we go through in wilderness, and this is not exhaustive. We could probably all sit down and name 15 essential tasks, but we're just going to talk about a couple of them this morning. The second one is about purpose. What am I here to do? You know, 2 weeks ago I had the opportunity to preach here, and we talked about covenant, right? And a key aspect of the covenant that God made with Israel was that He gave them something to do. He said, listen, I'm going to give you this, I'm going to walk with you, I'm going to be with you, you're going to be my people, and I want you to be a holy nation, a nation of priests. I want you to show the world what I'm like. You know, God saves Israel. He reaches down and delivers them, and He has a purpose for them. You know, he doesn't save them so that they can navel gaze, right? You know, Ephesians chapter 2, I love that text, for by grace you have been saved through faith, and this not of yourselves, it's the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. And then it goes on, for you are God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus. You could say recreated in Christ Jesus to do good works. God saved us to be about something in this world. God did not save any of us to be consumers of religious goods and services, right? God did not save us just so that we could come to church on the weekends. God saved us so that we might be a part of His mission in this world. We might be a part of the healing and shalom He is bringing everywhere. God reached in and saved you from whatever Egypt you've been through so that you might have something to give back. You know, many of you know that I lost my brother. It's been years, almost 20 years. Can you believe that, those of you who are here? In 1 year, it'll be 20 years since that experience. And man, I completely identify with that arc of peace and Egypt harm. I identify with deliverance. You know, we had just church members coming in and doing everything they could. We had this gathering in the fellowship hall where people brought us toasters and t-shirts and TVs and all kinds of other things that start with T, and just like supported us and took care of us and looked after us. And then there is this period of wilderness, of grief, and it lasted years, and it's still going on. But you know, I remember I don't know if I remember the moment, but I remember this season where I started to feel this sense of gratitude for having gone through that experience. And at first it felt like betrayal, and I've shared that feeling before here from this pulpit. It first felt like betrayal. It felt perverse to feel grateful for having gone through that. But very, very slowly, I came to recognize that, wow, I think that I have something to give for having gone through that. And in my heart, in my mind, having gone through that experience of Egypt and then sorting it out in wilderness, I came to think that, man, I have something to offer. I have some purpose that was born through that experience. And I don't know, maybe it would be possible without having gone through Egypt. I don't know, but I have a hard time imagining how I could possibly be the person that I am now without having integrated and been shaped through that experience. And so for some of us, when we go through this process of wilderness, it's coming to learn about how can my pain, how can my suffering be transformed to bless people around me. A second book before we go on to that third thing. I've come to love this. I've read The Wounded Healer by Henry Nouwen many, many times, and many of you perhaps have read it as well, but it's about this idea. How can the things, the ways that we've been wounded most deeply, how can those be transformed by God to help people around us? The third essential task this morning has to do with patterns of behavior. You know, this sermon series, we're focusing mostly on Genesis and Exodus, but the other three books of the Pentateuch, you know, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, Numbers, they're full of this is how you should live. And that's pretty much all they are, details about this is the instruction, if this happens, then do this, and this. It's lots and lots and lots and lots of details about how to do things, how to live, given your mission as a community, you know, speaking of Israel, given your calling to be a holy nation and a holy people, here's some instructions about how to accomplish that. You know, you kind of have the big picture, and then you kind of have the nitty-gritty details. And the truth of the matter is that when we go through Egypt, when we go through suffering, when we go through injustice or abuse or loss, very often after that, we have to learn new patterns. We got to learn new ways of coping. We got to learn new ways of thinking and relating to our feelings. We have to learn new patterns of behavior. There's all kinds of education that takes place in the wilderness. Some of you know I had the opportunity to run my first marathon a year ago, last May. And I'm getting ready for the next one. It's coming in October. And one of the things that I experienced or learned through that process is that you kind of have this, you know, giant hairy goal out here, right? This huge thing that feels like almost impossible to do. And then there's how do I get there, right? And for me, when I started thinking about running a very long distance, and I admit you can see my time there, I'm very slow, but I made it, and I ran the whole way, so there. But when I first started thinking about it, there's these programs that are called, you know, Couch to 5K, because I couldn't even run a mile without stopping, let alone, you know, multiple strung together. And so they have these programs that sort of get you, okay, this is how you get Couch to 5K, right? And if you go look those up, they have at least the one that I followed, had a very detailed plan. Day 1, do this. Day 2, do this. Day 3, do this. And the goal, well, we'll put the goal up here. The goal felt really big and daunting and scary, but today is go run 100 yards and then walk a mile. And so the process of learning the behavior of running the marathon, for me, it was broken into little tiny parts. And I often will say to people, I just followed the plan. I followed the plan. I worked the program. I chose a program somewhat at random, picked it, put the things on my calendar. Oh, today I got to run 3. Tomorrow I got to run 5. That day I have to run 10. You just follow the program. And little by little, all of a sudden I came to that Sunday morning and I had all kinds of confidence. Because I know I had done this prep along the way and I thought I could do it. And I think for some of us, when we're in the wilderness and we're trying to learn behaviors, it can be helpful to just put the things on there. Not maybe kind of somewhat arbitrary, but just make some simple goals. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to work on that. Small steps, simple rules. It doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be perfect. You know, this last week I was supposed to run a whole bunch and it was smoky and I didn't, and there's going to be grace for that, and I'm still going to finish the thing in October and it's going to be okay. We don't have to be perfect along the way, but just set some simple tasks along the way. And in my experience, the more you practice it, the more you embody it. I had a mentor once, and you've probably heard this before, who told me, you know, just fake it till you make it. I know you don't feel like it. I know you don't think you're there. I know you don't feel the part yet, but just act like you're there. And transformation happens when we're not looking. And all of a sudden it sneaks up on us, and there it is. Wow. God, what change did you make in my life? And so for some of us, when we're in our season of wilderness right now, we're in a season of learning new patterns, learning new behaviors. And so here's the invitation for us this morning. When you find yourself in this sort of wilderness, you've been injured, you've been abused, you've gone through injustice, it wasn't okay, there's no justification for it, and someone has stepped in to help, someone has stepped in to look after you and to take care of you. When you find yourself then in that season of wilderness where it's not right, it's not comfortable, it's not home, but I know I'm not being injured anymore, and you're just kind of in this waiting season, the invitation this morning is to just be there. Don't resist it. I have this silly little video about resisting, and there's no sound to it, but I thought it was just hysterical and cute. Let's watch it play. It's this little kid, and the wilderness is coming, right? The wilderness of sleep, right? The wilderness is coming. It's there, but he's fighting it. He's trying to overtake, but he keeps resisting, right? And it's our temptation. Man, we know it's uncomfortable, and I don't want to admit that I'm having to be there. But and then we risk this. We pretend like no, I'm not going to sleep. Everything's fine. I'm good, happy, right? Yep, I'm good. I'm good. Kind of. Yeah. It's inevitable, buddy. It's inevitable. All right, let's go on. It goes on for a long time. It's about a 5-minute video. But it might be really, really tempting to try to avoid the wilderness. It might be tempting to deny it. It might be tempting to say, listen, I wasn't in Egypt in the first place. There's no Egypt. Egypt? What are you talking about? There was no Egypt. It might be tempting to want to go back to Egypt for some of us. We might so identify with that victimhood that we want to live there forever. Some of you know what I'm talking about. Some of us like to pretend we're not in wilderness at all. Some of us might resent the wilderness. We might think that it's God inflicting Egypt on us. We might judge that this is active suffering when it actually isn't, and we're actually safe. And we're going to be okay. There's all kinds of, we might want to go back. There's all kinds of ways we resist wilderness. But stick with it. Let it come over you. There's work to be done. There's tasks to do. And when you wake up, we'll be there. We'll be in that promised land. So I want to end here. In your bulletins, we're sort of talking about our schools, K through 12 program, Rogers and Walla, and some of the things that are available for families and parents to get their kids there if they want them to be there. And, this was the first week of school. Finn started first grade, and it's full of new experiences and new challenges, and everything is learning how these new patterns and new expectations, and school can be tough. And I know that for me, I had a lot of experiences like that. This picture of me, I've tried to find one of me and my mom, and this is the only one I could find. I think that I might have just been right at the end of junior high or so in this picture. It's really glorious, I know. But I have these memories of coming home of being, having some experience at school. A bully was nasty to me, or someone said something, or I didn't get included in something, or whatever. And I was hurt, and it was painful, and at least to myself, it was not okay, and it was unjust and wrong. Like it was Egypt to me, and I would just be so upset. But then my mom would come pick me up, right? that chariot would come, that deliverance. And I'd sit in that giant van, and I was safe. And then we drive, and I maybe thought that I was okay some of the time, I don't know. But inevitably, and I remember many of these drives in this van where I would just break down sobbing. I was deep in the wilderness. This or that happened, this or that injury took place, this person said that thing, and I would just cry and cry. I was so sad. It's interesting that my memory of these incidents, I can't remember any of the specific things that happened, but I can remember being in that van with my mom. And she would do those tasks with me. She would remind me who I am. She would remind me that I'm loved exactly as I am. She would remind me that I'm smart and that people like me and that I have friends. She would remind me of my future and my purpose. Sometimes she'd give me advice and say, well, what if you tried this or what if you do that? We would talk through, we would work through this stuff. We would integrate it and deal with it and process. We'd do those tasks of wilderness. And it was uncomfortable in that van crying. It was sad. My little heart was broken. But my mom was with me. My mom was with me, and she said it would get better, and she believes in me, and she loves me just how I am, and she told me I can do it. And God is with us, and He believes in you, and He knows you can do it, and He has something great planned for you on your way to the promised land. So keep going. Don't give up. Don't give up. Don't stop. Keep going through the wilderness. You can make it. God is right with you.
Seinen Schimmer, den Gewand, hast du den Frühling uns gesandt und Rosen sein Haupt gewunden, Hot lächelt kommt schon, es führen in die Stunden, o Gott, auf seinen Blumenthron. Geht in Büschen und sie blühen, den Flüren kommt der frisches Grün und Walden wascht ihr Schatten wieder, der West liebkosend schwingt sein tauendes Gefieder und jede frohe Vogel singt mit euer Lieder süßen Klang, ihr Vogel soll auf mein Gesang zu Vater der Natur sich schwingen und Zukunft riss mich hin. Ich will dem Himmel absingen durch den ich für den was ich bin.
After the postlude, Mel Lang will be right up here in the front pew to minister in prayer to anyone who would appreciate that. Would you pray with me? Oh, great God, our lives are full of twists and turns and the effects, many, many effects of sin. And we suffer and are hurt, and are bruised, and we are injured. Dear Jesus, I pray that we might be people who would notice such injustice. I pray that we might be people who would take decisive action to protect the weak. And dear Jesus, as we make our way through those moments of suffering, and we spend time in the wilderness, walk with us. Remind us that you're right by our side. Help us to keep going. Give us trust and faith and hope, looking forward that we might get to that promised land. Be with us in this room and those who are with us afar. Walk with us and bless us, we pray in the name of Jesus. Amen.